Alright, so in this video we're talking about complex solutions, which we kind of introduced just briefly by graphing at the very beginning of this chapter. Remember, graphing works most of the time, but sometimes there's going to be no points of intersection, so no real solution. So in this video we're talking about how do you address that. So pretty much you need to understand the unit I. I represents an imaginary number and it has a value of the square root of -1. And what that means is I squared is equal to -1. So anytime you see an I in your calculator before you do anything else, you need to be in A plus BI mode. Okay, just because the calculator is sometimes temperamental, but we see an I, we want to be sure we're in the correct mode. That way the calculator hopefully will behave for us. I want to start off by graphing this equation and show you that, hey, we always try to graph if we can, because that's the easy way out. Left side's y1, right side's y2. Because I don't know if this is going to have a real solution or a complex solution. So I'm going to go to y equals, type in what I have. It's 3x squared plus 10. And then y2 I have -26. On a graph, zoom 6, and let's zoom fit also. Alright, well it might be kind of hard for you to see, but here's my curve, the x squared piece, and here's -26. I can go through the process, look for a point of intersection, so second count, option 5, first curve enter, second curve enter, and then guess. I get an error. If I have this error and no sign change, what that means is the calculator cannot find a point of intersection. So you either play with the zoom some more, or in this case, if you look at the graph, there actually is no points of intersection. So no points of intersection. That means no real solution, which means yes, complex solutions. Now, anytime you can say yes, there's complex solutions, that means you cannot graph it. Not with these calculators that we have. We have to now do this by hand. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just rewrite my original problem so you can see a little bit better. 3x squared plus 10 equals -26, and I'm going to start solving this by hand. Since I only have an x squared, there is no regular x, I'm going to solve this by taking square roots. So -10 on each side, like we did in the previous videos. So 3x squared equals -36. I want to get x squared by itself, so divide by 3. So x squared equals, now -36 divided by +3. Use calculator to help you out with scratch work if you want to. And that was -12. Okay, no big deal. But now I've got to get x by itself. I don't want x squared, so I've got to get rid of that squared. Remember, as soon as I see a square, that's going to mean there's two answers, and I've got to use square roots each side. So we're going to say plus or minus. Okay, so I have x equals plus or minus the square root of -12. Well, anytime I see a negative underneath the square root symbol, that means I'm automatically going to have an I. So x equals plus or minus I times square root of 12. Okay, so that square root of a negative becomes an I, and it gets to come outside. I'm still left with square root of 12. You technically could leave your answer like this. You could split it up into two separate answers if you wanted to. X equals positive I square root of 12. X equals negative I square root of 12. Or you can clean it up a little bit more. Square root of 12 can be written as 4 times 3. So we have x equals I times 4, square root of 4 times 3. X equals negative I square root of 4 times 3. Well, the square root of 4 is 2. So that means I have x equals 2I square root of 3. X equals negative 2I. Square root of 3. Might seem a little complicated at first. If you want to just leave it square root of 12, that's fine. I cleaned it up as far as I could. I still have two answers if I write it this way, plus or minus. I still have two answers if I write it this way, positive and negative. And I still have two answers if I clean it up as much as possible. Okay? The big thing here to realize is that anytime you have a complex number with an I in it, it's always going to come in pairs. Okay, so you can never have just one answer with an I. It's always going to come in pairs. Two, a pair of twos, a pair of fours, a pair of six. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Also, don't forget, anytime you see a negative underneath a square root sign, that's an I that gets to come outside. Okay, so keep that in mind. So another example or two. We're going to talk about the quadratic formula. Now, we've talked about different methods to solve so far by factoring and by taking square roots. You might not be good at factoring. You may not be good at taking square roots. But if you can understand and memorize this formula, the quadratic formula, which many of you probably have seen and even used this formula before in previous classes, it'll solve any quadratic equation, even if you got an I in it. Okay? So there's a song that goes with the quadratic formula, goes with Pop Goes the Weasel. You might want to YouTube that. I'm not going to sing it for you. I'm not going to put you through that torture. Alright, so first off, anytime you want to use the quadratic formula, you have to get everything on the same side. Okay, so I'm going to start in this example with 29, subtracting 5. You've got to get everything on the same side. So 2x squared plus x minus 5. Also, we need to go in order. X squares, regular x in the middle, and then finally, regular numbers on the end. This is now going to be equal to 0. As soon as you have that, you're good to go. My first number is A, my middle number is B, my last number is C. So that means A equals 2, B equals 1, because there's an understood 1 in front of the x, and C equals negative 5. As soon as I know those numbers, I can plug into the quadratic formula. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I have x equals negative b, so negative 1. And remember, when you plug in, put it in parentheses, please, I beg you. It's important that you do that. Plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. All I did here was plug in for a, b, and c into my quadratic formula. Now I'm going to clean this up as much as I can. Negative and a positive make a negative. Plus or minus. Now I want to clean this up on the inside of my square root. I'm going to use my calculator for that. All I'm doing is the inside of the square root only. So type it in exactly the way it looks, including the parentheses. Minus 4 parentheses 2 parentheses negative 5. So the inside of my parentheses comes out to be a positive 41. Make sure I didn't make any stupid mistakes. Everything looks good. Plus or minus the square root of 41. And then 2 times 2 is 4. Technically, I'm done. I could leave my answer like this. Kind of messy, but that's all right. Or since it's plus or minus, I could split this up. So my first answer could be x equals negative 1 plus square root of 41 divided by 4. My second answer could be x equals negative 1 minus square root of 41 divided by 4. Now, of course, you might be interested in turning each of these into decimals, okay? Let's say it's multiple choice and you have a decimal. The thing you've got to remember is before you do anything, since I have a fraction here, I've got more than one thing on top, you need to put that inside parentheses. Alright, so I'm going to do the first one over here on the left. Figure out what decimal that is. So I have parentheses, negative 1 plus square root 41, close the parentheses, divided by 4. I get 1.35. And then let's do the other one over here on the right. So parentheses, the blue parentheses, negative 1 minus square root 41, close parentheses. Now, notice that when you hit the square root symbol, it automatically gives you a parenthesis that you have to close. So this parenthesis right here is just closing up the square root. It's not the blue parenthesis on the end. So to get the blue parenthesis on the end, you've got to do it again. Divided by 4. And you get negative 1.85. And what's great about the quadratic formula is that These two decimals that we just found are the exact decimals that we would have found if we graphed the original problem, y1, y2. Let's try another one. We want to solve this one. Again, I want to use quadratic formula because I don't know if factoring is going to work. I don't know if taking square roots is going to work. So I do know quadratic formula will work no matter what. But first, I got to get everything on the same side. So I'm going to take 5x over to the left first by subtracting. All right, so cancel out. So x squared minus 6x equals negative 9. X squared minus 6x equals negative 9. Now I'm going to move this negative 9 over to the left-hand side by adding. So x squared plus x squared minus 6x plus 9 equals 0. Okay? Now, I can go and tell you that this will work by factoring, but we're going to practice using quadratic formula. Again, my very first number is A, my middle number with the regular x's is B, and my last number that always goes with the regular numbers is C. So that means A is 1 in this problem because there's a 1x squared, B is negative 6, and then C is 9. You have to have it in this order. X squared, regular x's, regular numbers. That's the only way quadratic formula will work. As soon as you have those numbers, we're going to plug into the quadratic formula, which if it helps you to memorize, which it does me, rewrite the quadratic formula a couple of times. The more times you write out the quadratic formula, the more times it's going to get tattooed on your brain. So now what we're going to do is actually just plug this stuff in. So x equals negative of negative 6. Again, I'm plugging in, so I'm going to put that in parentheses. Please do that. Plus or minus square root of negative 6 squared minus 4 times A times C all over 2 times A. And now I want to start cleaning this up as much as I can. So x equals negative negative makes a positive, so 6 plus or minus square root. I want to figure out what's going on inside my square root. So I'm going to use my calculator to do that. Again, type the parentheses. It's very important that you do that. So parentheses negative 6 squared minus 4 parentheses 1 times 9. I get 0. 2 times 1 is 2. Okay? So I want to clean this up as much as I can. The square root of 0 is always 0. So x equals 6 plus or minus 0 over 2. Have x by itself, so technically that's my answer. I want to split this up though. So x equals 6 plus 0 divided by 2, and x equals 6 minus 0 divided by 2. Let's clean it up. Obviously on top, 6 plus 0 is 6. So x equals 6 over 2, which is 3. 6 minus 0 on top is 6. So 6 over 2, which is 3. Again, I have the same answer repeated, so this is called a repeated root. Again, root is just a fancy word for solution. And if I graph this, again, I'm only going to see one point of intersection, but algebraically, as we just saw from the quadratic formula, there's actually 2 answers. It's called a repeated root. Okay, another one. We've got to start off using quadratic formula. Start off by getting everything on the same side. So minus 2, minus 2. So negative x squared plus 2x minus 2 equals 0. Again, if it helps you, I suggest write out the quadratic formula many times. Okay, and I need to figure out what my A, B, and C is. Remember, I have to have x squared, regular x's, regular numbers, which I do. So that means A is equal to negative 1, because there's a negative 1 there. B is equal to 2, and C is equal to negative 2. Okay? Notice that the variables are never part of it. Like this 2x, it's just 2. It's my B. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now what we're going to do is plug into my quadratic formula. When you plug in, please punch your numbers inside parentheses. Super critical. I wouldn't ask you to do it unless it's important. So x equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. All I did was plug in for a, b, and c. Everywhere I see an a, plug in -1. Everywhere I see a b, plug in a 2. Everywhere I see a c, plug in a -2. Now I'm going to start cleaning this up as much as I can. So x equals negative and positive to negative, so -2 plus or minus square root. Now I want to see what happens on the inside of my square root, so I'm going to use a calculator to do a little bit of scratch work. Again, type it in exactly the way it looks. So 2 parentheses squared minus 4 parentheses -1 parentheses -2. And I get -4. Okay, and on the bottom I have -2. Now, like we just saw at the beginning of this video, anytime I see a negative underneath the square root, that's an I that gets to come outside. So I have x equals -2 plus or minus I square root of 4, all divided by -2. Technically, I could stop there because I have x by itself, but I want to keep going. I want to clean up as much as I can. So I'm going to split this up into 2 parts. So x equals -2 plus I square root of 4 divided by -2. And x equals -2 minus I square root of 4 divided by -2. I can obviously keep cleaning up some more because square root of 4 is 2. So this is x equals -2 plus 2I over -2. And same thing, square root of 4 is positive 2. So we have -2 minus 2I over -2. So again, you could stop here. Or you could keep going. Obviously, both pieces on top are being divided by -2. What I suggest you do is use your calculator. Again, I see an I, so I want to make sure I'm in A plus BI mode, which I am, because I did that earlier in this video. When I type it in my calculator, I have more than one thing on top, so I need parentheses. So that's what I'm going to do. So parentheses of -2 plus 2I, to get to the I, you hit second decimal, divided by -2. Clean it up, and so this actually becomes x equals 1 minus I. And then this one over here, same idea. I have more than one thing on top, so put parentheses around it. So parentheses -2 minus 2I divided by -2, and I get 1 plus I. Anytime you see an I as part of your answer, that's called a complex solution. And remember, if I can get rid of my calculator, complex solutions always come in pairs. Okay, so I have a pair of complex solutions. Right? Like I said, quadratic formula works no matter what. If you have 2 real solutions, 1 repeated solution that's real, or 2 complex solutions as we just saw. So quadratic formula is probably the most important in this whole chapter that you need to know. Make sure you know it. Sing the song if you need to help you get it. Let me know if you've got questions.